Hello everyone, it's Mike and we're back again with another reaction video. I would just like to say quickly as well that I have received some suggestions of videos to react to, and I will be getting to those. I'm not ignoring you, I haven't forgot about them either. It's just that when I logged onto my PC today, I saw that OverSimplified had uploaded new videos in my recommended, and particularly they were the Russian Revolution videos, and so that's a period of history that I'm really interested with, that I know a little bit about, and I would like to kind of broaden my own horizons, as well as try and again do like what I've done with the other reaction videos, where I expand where perhaps oversimplified's thing. And so that's what I'm hoping to do. I'm also trying out a new format. This time, in the previous videos, I've been a tiny little head in front of the video. However, I realise sometimes that I actually block the video and block kind of some of the graphics or whatever. So I'm trying out this new thing where I'm bigger and you get a nice, bigger, lovely view of my mug, and you get to see the entire video unobstructed. So if this is a better format rather than the previous one, I'd really appreciate some feedback on that. But nevertheless, let's get into it. And oh yeah, just one last thing. Please go over and again check out OverSimplified's videos. They are ultimately the people who are responsible for this. I'm just merely watching it and talking about it like the idiot that I am. But it's what I hope to do, and so please go over there, show them some love, show them some support, and without further ado, let's get into it. I don't know when this video is taking place. Date wise, I mean, because I saw there was 2 parts and each were around 20 minutes long, so hopefully it should cover quite a lot of detail. It's just I don't know if it will lead up to, like, this first part will lead up to the first revolution, the February/March revolution. The reason why I say that is because it's February for the West and March for the Russian calendar, and the same goes for the October-November revolution. So that's how I'll refer to things without getting too confused. Is basically when I say February-March revolution, I don't mean I don't know if it's February or March. It's just because due to the different calendars from Western calendar and the Russian calendar, the revolutions took place in those months correspondingly. So in the Western calendar, it's the February and October revolutions, and for Russians, it's the revolutions took place in March and November. So I'd just like to clear that up before anybody gets a little bit confused. And yeah, so I don't know if this part 1 is going to lead us up to the February-March revolutions or what, because again, it's oversimplified, so it could provide context or it could not. So we'll just have to see whereabouts we're starting. So let's get into it.
This video was made possible by NordVPN. Click on the link in the description below to get an amazing 68% off a 2-year plan. Also, commemorating the weirdest bromance in history. Get your new character pins and Russian Revolution merch available now. Link down below. Hey Jimmy, it's the 1800s, an exciting time to be alive. Why don't you get out there and explore the world? Gee whiz, Mom, thanks. This place is amazing. Where am I? Why, you're in France, my boy. Here we come up with wacky new ways of running a country. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Whoa, welcome to the United Kingdom. Here we invented the train. Oh, aboard! Holy smokes! You're in a German factory, my friend. Here we harness fire and coal to create all these sexy leaderhoods. This is incredible! I can't wait to see where I'll end up next. Where am I? You're in Russia.
Yeah, so if that's the start date where little Jimmy is the 1800s, depending on if we're at the beginning or end of it. But yeah, it's a joke, but it is relatively true. While the rest of the European countries were modernizing and progressing and industrializing, Russia was a little bit caught in 2 minds. First things first as well, it's useful to understand that the Russian Empire was a beast of a country to run. A bit, you know, you think about how big Russia is today, the Russian borders were enormous. You had it reaching from the Baltic Sea all the way over to the Pacific. You had its northernmost reaches in the Arctic Circle, and its southern borders reached as far as Persia. And this was an enormous amount of land to try and maintain, to try and manage logistically and just administratively. And it was a tremendous task that ultimately, again, time and time again, was a failure to do so. A bit like here. Russian remember how big I said Russia was? Only 5% of Russia's landmass was dedicated to farming. And that 5% of that landmass that was used for farming was farmed in extremely inefficient, ineffective ways that often didn't actually provide enough food for people to live. Russia had a population of, I think at the time, over 120 million people. It might even be as high as 130. I'm off a little bit depending on exactly when we're talking. But you have only 5% of a landmass that's farmed inefficiently, is ineffective, it doesn't provide enough food for 120 million people. That's an awful lot of people to try and provide food for. Added on to that, because of the sheer size of it, communications, roads were incredibly poor, linking places. You had cities where there was some, good infrastructure in place, but in general, the majority of the country was fairly awash with dirt roads, if there was roads at all. And then again, added onto this as well, because it's such a large landmass with so many different types of people, it was a problem trying to administer those, because again, depending on roughly when we're talking about, if we're talking about early 1800s to later 19th century, only 40% of the population spoke Russian as their first language, and 60% of the population spoke some sort of other dialect or other language as their mother tongue, and Russia was a secondary language. So it meant that in certain parts of Russia you had people being administered in the Russian language that they necessarily wouldn't actually speak fluently, or you'd have places in Russia that were being administered to in a different language that was different to the actual language of the state itself. Added onto this, you had serfdom, depending on where we are, if the emancipation of the serfs have happened yet. While European powers were marching forward and progressing and industrializing on rapid scales, Russia was kind of stuck in the past. Maybe I'll be jumping ahead of what problems that might cause, but we'll see.
Have I gone back in time? No, this is just how it is. Are you a farmer? Worse. Technically, my landlord owns me, which makes me a serf.
Okay.
I'm scared. You should be, because I haven't eaten in 4 days, and you look pretty tasty. Hey, Jimmy, how are your travels? I hate you!
So again, just quickly as well, if you're unfamiliar with the term serf are like farmers, but they're not farmers. So essentially they work and tow the land, but they're tied to the land via the landlord. So the landlord almost owns the serfs as property. And again, it's almost subhuman. It's almost a form of, in a weird way, of slavery. In the sense that the serfs are tied to the land, they're tied to the landowner, and really the serfs didn't really have too much autonomy beyond what the landlord said that they could or couldn't do, or village councils, which often were hinged around the landlord's whims and wishes anyway. And obviously, if we're starting at that point, the emancipation of the serfs hasn't happened yet, passed by Alexander II, but even that was troublesome. But hopefully, considering we're starting here, OverSimplified will explain that for us. But yeah.
Russia in the 19th century, feudal, underdeveloped, and stuck in the past, while the rest of Europe had been modernizing and improving their citizens' lives. Russia's rulers were taking a different approach. My lord, we're falling behind the rest of Europe. It's time to industrialize, give the people rights, and share your power. Russian czars had no time for pathetic ideas like liberty and modernization because they were too busy having the time of their lives. While the serfs were breaking their backs in the fields, the czars held all the power, and they didn't have to listen to anyone. Want to run the country like a backwards feudal kingdom while the rest of Europe outpaces you militarily and economically? Go right ahead. Want to keep the people uneducated so they don't get any ideas? There's no one to stop you. Want to keep exporting grain even when there's a massive famine causing hundreds of thousands to die? That is your God-given right. While all of this was great for the Tsar, if you were literally anybody else, it probably sucked because Russia was falling behind. If they were to keep up with Europe, they'd need a strong ruler with some big ideas. Oh look, here comes one now. Hey everyone, it's me, Tsar Alexander II, and I've got some big news. I'm releasing you all from your serfdom. You're all free. Yep, I'm the best. Oh.
So that was the emancipation of the serfs, but he said an O, so I wonder if he's going to actually say the cash of what the emancipation of the serfs actually brought.
There is one thing though. I spoke to your local lords and they weren't happy about losing all their free labor. So as a compromise, you're all gonna have to pay them back a near impossible amount of money for the next 49 years. Expect your lives to barely change. Okay, bye. Now I know it.
Yeah. So that was the problem with the emancipation of the serfs, essentially, was that they were freed but not freed. So they weren't serfs anymore, but they were bound financially, essentially, to the landlords still, because the landlords, who already, many of them were already extremely wealthy, didn't want to give up their free labour, or their low-paying labour, and so they demanded recompense. And the way to keep the aristocracy sweet was to essentially say, okay, well, the serfs need to pay you back money. Which, over the next 49 years, remember, this is the 19th century, 49 years was essentially lifetimes for people. Life expectancy was not great. And so again, it was a good idea on paper, the emancipation of the serfs. However, when it actually came to practice, it was, well, awful, really, and there's no getting around it. But we'll continue with this. We'll see what happens, because Alexander II is still knocking about, and spoiler alert, he gets assassinated at some point. But we'll see if we get to that.
You're thinking, this Tsar Alexander II seems like a pretty cool guy. He's trying to reform the country and get Russia on the right path. Everyone must love this guy, right? Wrong. Why does one man get to decide the fate of everyone in the country? This whole system is dumb. Somebody should do something. Like what? Like kill the Tsar. You're gonna kill the Tsar? Well, me? No. I'm busy. I was kind of hoping you'd do it. Okay. See? The people love me. They're throwing flowers, confetti, and high-grade explosives. Okay, Nicholas.
I mean, it's a joke, but genuinely, Alexander II survived more assassination attempts than Hitler did, and it's actually quite a shame because, it's a shame when anybody gets assassinated. But what I mean is when you actually read, I've been reading a book recently as well about famous assassinations of the past, and Alexander II is one of those. And he, for large parts of his life, he was absolutely racked with paranoia. He was completely fearful that people was going to kill him. He frequently kept asking after all these assassinations, is he really so evil that he deserves to have all of this happening to him? And on the basis of things, really, when you compare him to previous Tsars in particular, no, he didn't. He was certainly unpopular from certain sections, but there was also large sections of society that actually was quite supportive of him, because although the emancipation of the serfs was extremely dodgy, he did want to reform Russia and move it forward. However, again, assassinated before he could do this, and this would have tremendous knock-on effects. So people, again, a bit like what they said there, people were critical of Alexander II because he was a Tsar, he was an autocrat, and they didn't think that he should have all the power, and so they assassinated him. However, this went on to have the opposite effect, because Alexander III took over. And Alexander III reversed a lot of the reforms that his father had made, some of them being extremely progressive, and cracked down on any dissidents. With the secret police, anyone to be a dissident or a potential dissident was rounded up by secret police, given secret trials or sometimes no trial whatsoever. And particularly as well when Alexander II was killed. And again, I apologize as well if you're rather squeamish, because I'm about to get into the graphic detail of how it actually happened. Was he had both his legs blown up, and when that explosion happened, he had both his legs blown off at the knee, and the explosion was so powerful they actually forced one of his eyes out of his socket. And Nicholas II there, who was his grandson, witnessed this. And again, arguably, when you're young and you witness your grandfather die in such a horrific manner, that also went on to shape some of the decisions that he made when he actually became Tsar himself, particularly in handling dissidents. But that's jumping ahead.
Your grandfather has a mild case of being blown up by a terrorist, and he's not looking too hot. So we're gonna go say our goodbyes, okay? No, it'll be too scary for him. Nonsense, it won't be scary at all. We're just gonna say a quick goodbye. Ready? Boy, look at me. The people did this to me. And one day, they'll do it to you! See? Wasn't scary at all. So Alexander II was dead, but luckily they had another Alexander lying around, Alexander the Third, and he felt his dad's reforms had weakened the Tsar's authority. Russia was massive, and as a result, had many ethnic minorities.
Yeah, so again, that's
Tsar's authority.
Just skip
Russia was
get
massive,
to
and
the
as
dialects.
a result, had many ethnic minorities.
Yeah, so as you can see there's tons of different ethnic minorities, and in large areas, particularly in the Far East and the South, many of these people actually were the people that I said who didn't speak Russian, and again, religion as well was a factor. And some of these people had different religions and faiths that was different to the Russian Orthodox Church, and you know, again, that's another issue when you're trying to manage such a large place and such a large population, is how do you balance so many pans at the same time? Or how do you manage so many plates at the same time, rather, is the analogy. But yeah.
Minorities. Non-Russians? More interested in their own cultural heritage than in loving me? Isn't it great? So much beautiful culture and diversity in our great nation. Alexander thought all these minorities should be a little more Russian, and thereby loyal to him. So he repressed religious minorities.
Yep.
He repressed non-Russians. He introduced the Okhrana, a secret police force that repressed anybody who thought having a czar was dumb. If Alexander II was the great reformer, Alexander III was the great repressor. Now,
when you download Europe's #1
I love
CFD trading
adverts.
platform, you're opening a door.
now that's
Yeah, so again, that's what he done, was he thought that his father had made reforms and it weakened Russia, and that got him killed. So he thought, well, the way to strengthen Russia is to reverse those reforms, and if the people don't love you, they can certainly fear you, and that's what he attempted to do. He didn't necessarily want to be loved, he wanted the population to be obedient. And we'll see how that went.
how you run a country. Hey, Dad? Ugh, great. It's my son Nicholas, who I like to call a girly girl because he's so weak and pathetic. When are you gonna grow up? You still look like a girly girl to me. But Dad, I grew a beard. Yeah, an ugly girly girl beard. If Nicholas was to one day be czar, he needed his dad to teach him how to run the country. But his dad instead suggested that Nicholas go somewhere else. So Nicholas went to Japan, got an edgy dragon tattoo, had his head sliced off by a policeman, and then came home. Now will you teach me how to rule? I suppose it's time. Okay, there's a lot you need to know before becoming czar. Uh-oh. What? I've got kidney inflammation.
Rip.
Oh no! Upon his father's death, a totally unprepared Nicholas II ascended to the Russian throne. He wasn't a reformer like his grandfather, nor was he a repressor like his dad. Nicholas was Nicholas. Timid, easily swayed, and more interested in doing whatever the hell this is. Or this. Or this. He wasn't ready to rule, and he himself admitted it, saying, "I'm not yet ready to be czar. I know nothing of the business of ruling." Bit of an awkward time to bring it up. However, Nicholas firmly believed that he was chosen by God to be Russia's big daddy. And while he doubted his ability to rule, he was gonna give it his best shot. And hey, who knows? Maybe he wouldn't be so bad after all. To get things off to a good start, Nicholas promised free pretzels and beer to a huge crowd in Moscow to celebrate his coronation. So enticing a proposition to starving peasants that the ensuing stampede left nearly 1,500 people dead. What the hell happened?
Oh. Okay, now that I did not know. Shouldn't really be laughing at that. What way to be coronated, I guess. Have a stampede.
We're not sure, but you're scheduled to go party with the French at 8 o'clock. Shouldn't I stay here out of respect for the people? When have Russian czars ever respected the people? Nicholas's decision to go party with the French immediately tarnished his image. Some were calling him Nicholas the Bloody. The czars had been partying hard at the expense of the people for long enough. They'd emancipated the serfs, but failed to lift them out of poverty. They used their secret police to crack down on anyone who might criticize them, and they'd failed to modernize and give the people rights, something the rest of Europe had begun doing over a century ago. The rule of the czars was quickly becoming outdated, and more Russians began wondering if there was a better way. For many, the solution was simple. Just look to the West. Republics, democracies, and constitutional monarchies galore. But a small growing group rejected that for an even better idea. A little something they called communism. Take Vladimir Lenin, an intelligent member of Russia's middle class, and also a massive ill-tempered jerk. If you disagreed with him about anything, he wasn't afraid to call you out. You fat-headed, simple-minded, vapid, cockeyed imbecile! Tenderheart Bear is a far superior Care Bear to Bedtime Bear. And he was no stranger to political unrest either. His older brother was executed for plotting to kill the Tsar, and Lenin himself was expelled from university for participating in a student protest. But how did Lenin go from being a middle-class nerd to the arbiter of socialist divinity? Well, to tell that story, we first need to go back a few decades to when a man named Karl Marx wrote a manifesto explaining how capitalism is a system whereby the stinky bourgeoisie oppressed and exploited the working masses, and that only through class warfare could the workers rise up and instate a communist utopia. Now go back forward a few decades to Lenin reading that manifesto and loving it. But publicly admitting you loved Marx and not Russia's Big Daddy would get you the cruelest punishment imaginable. Exile to Siberia. Enjoy exile, where you'll live with your wife, chill around town, and secretly write socialist newspapers. Hey, that doesn't sound so bad. And your mother-in-law is going to live with you. No! Once Lenin finished his stint...
Yeah, so that wouldn't be the first time that Lenin would be exiled or forced away from things. Yeah, it would happen quite a few more times. And again, Karl Marx writing the Communist Manifesto was extremely resounding with Lenin. And again, with Nicholas II being a weak ruler, because that's what he was. Again, as I said, he wasn't fit to rule, he wasn't ready to rule. He hadn't been groomed for rulership by his father, and so he was kind of clueless. And I hope this video also encounters possibly one of the most influential people of the 20th century, and I think is incredibly underlooked, and that is Tutor Stollpin, however you pronounce it. Apologies for that. Because people talk about defining moments of the 20th century, and they talk about the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, but certainly another assassination that certainly, in my opinion, changed the 20th century was the assassination of Tutor Stollpin, and I hope we get to him later on. If we don't, then I'll try and fill in the gaps. But yeah, so Russia, Nicholas II is incredibly not getting off to a good start. And again, now that I know the situation we're at as well, is Russia is kind of split. So you have the aristocracy with Nicholas II, obviously, and the landed nobles. And at this time, during Nicholas II's reign, 1.5% of the population, which was the highest of aristocracy, owned a quarter of the land, a quarter of all the land. And so, again, a bit like what this video has already said, they lived in stark contrast to the poorest of society. They partied, they lived in elegant mansions and townhouses and country houses. They could kind of do wherever they wanted. Particularly nobles in the country, there was kind of almost little like feudal kingdoms of their own. You know, they could basically go and do whatever they wanted with their land. And then you had the middle class, and Lenin is an exception because most of the middle class were capitalists, and this will come into a form a little bit later on when Russia really makes a proper effort to industrialize under Nicholas II. And again, while they was more concerned with the running of the economy, of course, other things that they had was things like workers' rights, how they should treat or how they should pay their workers, and that would lead to clashes between capitalists and their workers, and that would ultimately lead up to a head in things like the 1917 in 1917 with the revolutions. And then not quite, well, a little bit now, but a little bit in the future, you had the industrial working class, which were the big boys in kind of driving the revolution which happened. These were usually peasants who had moved to the cities when the Russians were trying to industrialize, you know, and getting to their credit, the Russians were able to industrialize. I think over a relatively short amount of time, they was able to, I think, treble coal and oil production and quadruple steel or iron production. Steel, I think it was. Oh, iron. Yeah, it was iron because it was Russia, although it was vast and the logistics actually were awful, what it did have was a wealth of natural resources, and coal and iron were particularly those. However, these people moved to the cities, peasants moved to the cities, but again, the people who own the factories or own those, the capitalist middle class, as it's easy to sum them up, didn't exactly have the best conditions. The workers were low paid. They often worked 12, 16 hours a day with relatively low pay, and the bigger these cities got, the more peasants flooded there, and that just led to things that you did see in industrializing in the other European countries in their genius, which were your Paris, your London and stuff, where you have factories which are producing large amounts of wealth, but in people's desire to get a part of that wealth, to work in those factories as well, they are also living and working in appalling conditions. However, again, remember, Russia is far behind the other European powers again at this point. And then, of course, at the bottom rung, we already said they're not serfs anymore, but they're peasants, and they made up like 80% of the population, and they were the bottom of society. Essentially farmed to subside, to just try and live, racked in the middle of nowhere with hardly any infrastructure. And again, it would be those who would suffer the most when famines hit, and basically those who would suffer the most, full stop, really. And that's why so many of them fled to the cities. But when they actually got to the cities and they saw how poor the living and working conditions were, again, maybe they might have reconsidered, was living actually in the countryside that much worse than where they was at the minute. But anyway, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, because that's not till we're actually getting near revolution time. But that's the kind of makeup of Russian society.
In Siberia, he left Russia for Europe, where he was free to hang out with other Russian Marxists and talk about how great communism was. Now today, you might hear the word communism and think of this. But that's not how intellectuals living under a tough czarist regime saw it. To them, communism promised a land where all were equal, where workers weren't exploited, and even people like you could get a girlfriend. So Lenin joined a party of Russian communists living in Europe, and he founded a communist newsletter that was smuggled into Russia to try to radicalize the people. However, not everyone in the Socialist Party agreed with Lenin. In fact, they disagreed with him on a lot of issues, and Lenin was so uncompromising that he caused a split in the party. During one conference, a heated debate broke out, and Lenin was unwilling to give an inch. You pig-ignorant, half-witted, fatuous morons! Cereal is a soup! Listen, Lenin, you're a smart guy, but you have no idea what you're talking about. We're out of here. All in favor of cereal being a soup? Hey, would you look at that? We're in the majority. So Lenin set up his own faction within the party he called the majority, or Bolshevik if you're speaking
Bolsheviks.
Russian. And the other faction became known as the minority, or Menshevik. And oddly, the majority were often in the minority, and the minority in the majority. The Mensheviks
Not
were
confusing
less
at all.
radical, whereas Lenin wanted the Bolsheviks to be loyal to him and his uncompromising ideas. And if you weren't loyal, well then you're gonna get a big brain beatdown. Mensheviks worried that Lenin's attitude could lead to a one-man dictatorship. But come on, does this guy look like a dictator to you? For now, Lenin remained in Europe, writing his socialist newspaper and impatiently awaiting an opportunity to overthrow the Tsar and bring communist utopia to Russia. Cool. A free hat. Who the heck are you? I'm definitely not a Russian secret police officer spying on Marxists. Oh crap, I don't want secret police watching me. Then you, my friend, should use NordVPN.
Oh.
Do you like having your identity stolen? If yes, you need therapy. If no, you need NordVPN. NordVPN has thousands of super fast servers.
I don't know if I'm annoyed or impressed by that, but
you and your data secure when using the web. It comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and is now faster and more secure than ever with its brand new NordLynx technology. Have you quarantine binged all of your favorite shows on Netflix? Well, with NordVPN, you can watch the Australian version. Or is one of the greatest videos on YouTube still banned in your country? I think you get the point. You can now get NordVPN with 68% off a 2-year plan for only $371 per month, plus 1 month free. So click on nordvpn.com/oversimplified in the description below and get protected now. That's nordvpn.com/oversimplified. And as always, you'll be supporting my channel. So muchos arigatos, mon petit pois. Now where was I? Oh,
there we go, boys.
A timid, easily swayed czar, a massive ill-tempered jerk, impatiently awaiting a communist revolution. And revolution was coming, but not in the way Lenin thought. Back in St. Petersburg, one of the Tsar's most skilled and influential advisors knew the country finally needed to catch up with the rest of Europe. Hey Nick, we really got to industrialize, get more factories, and make some, I don't know, textiles or something. Won't that change the social fabric of Russia? Maybe. Hey, isn't it past your bedtime? But I haven't had my milk and snuggles yet. Will you snuggle me? Nicholas thought modernization was boring, but he let Sergei do his thing. And do his thing he did. He borrowed some money and got Russia some sexy factories.
Yep.
And you know what sexy factories means. Sexy workers. Dirt poor, sexy workers. Long hours, low wages, filthy disease-ridden factories, sleep in overcrowded dormitories with all your stinky worker friends, get your arms ripped off in a freak Russian doll accident. Conditions were terrible. But this growing working class wasn't about to take it lying down. They started to do what workers do best. Strike.
Yeah, so that's a little bit like what I was saying, is industrialization brought rapid expansion to the cities in their population. However, again, previously to what I said earlier, the conditions were awful, and the workers at some point had enough. And when they struck, depending on when this has, it actually their calls for better pay and better working conditions actually led to disaster. And I don't know if this is what it's about to portray, but we'll see.
Despite Sergei's efforts, people in Russia still weren't happy. Peasants were still poor, liberals still wanted reform, and now the workers wanted better working conditions. And the problem with being an autocrat is that when everyone's unhappy, there's only one person to blame. You.
Yep.
The people hate me. What do I do? Ooh, I know. Why don't we find a weak and pathetic nation to go to war with? We'll win easily, and everyone will love me again. Why don't we just try treating the people better? As luck would have it,
That'll be the Russo-Japanese War, I believe. So we're looking at around
an opportunity
1905?
for war was forming in the Far East.
I think.
Russia wanted to expand its sphere of influence into northern China, and coincidentally, so did Japan. But Japan didn't really want war, so they proposed an idea to reduce the tension. Hey man, we'll let you do your thing in Manchuria if you let us do our thing in Korea. I don't think so. We've got the largest army in the world. What do you have? I'm the Emperor of Japan. I have a giant mecha suit. Whoa. Cool. Nicholas and the boys didn't see Japan as a threat, so they felt they could push Japan around. But little did they know, Japan had been rapidly militarizing,
Yeah.
and when they launched a surprise attack on a Russian fleet at Port Arthur, everyone was shocked. Nicholas hoped it was an opportunity to win a quick war and regain the support of the people. Nobody seriously thought a puny Asian country could defeat a European superpower, and the Russian people were filled with patriotic spunk. Hey everyone, we're at war with Japan! Hey everyone, we're losing the war.
Yeah,
The
wasn't.
Japanese won, an embarrassing defeat for Tsar Nicholas. Russia had enough problems, but now it had been internationally humiliated.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Russia lost, but they lost fairly decisively. The Russian kind of Eastern Fleet was utterly ruined. The Japanese Navy won a decisive victory at the Battle of Tsushima, and again on land, Russia didn't fare much better either. The Japanese were in large parts far more organised, far better equipped, and had far better leadership than the Russians did. And so what was supposed to be a easy and straightforward victory for the Russians actually ended up being the opposite. And it just, again, that patriotic fervour that came about with the beginning of the war, that, you know, a quick victory can distract everyone and think about how great the country is. When you lose that war against the weaker nation, when people already hate you, it's just going to make things worse, and worse they did, particularly outside the Winter Palace, which I think we're getting to now.
The public were outraged. Unrest increased. Nicholas needed snuggles now more than ever. The tension was rising rapidly, and Russia was on the verge of revolution. All it needed was one disaster to push it over the edge. And that disaster would come in January 1905 from an unlikely source, a handsome Orthodox priest named Father Gapon.
Yep.
Father Gapon was leading workers and their families to the Winter Palace, but this wasn't some violent uprising.
No.
It was a peaceful protest. They wanted to deliver a petition to Nicholas, which simply asked for more freedom and better working conditions. The protest was actually so peaceful and respectful that the Marxists thought it was a big waste of time. Hey Nicholas, some priest is leading a peaceful protest. Says here they want to give you a petition. A peaceful petitioning priest? I better get out of here. Nicholas had actually left the Winter Palace days earlier, and in his place, they brought in a truckload of troops, ordered to stop Father Gapon from reaching the palace. Hello, good sir, and long live the Tsar. Please, allow me to pass this simple petition to our dear father, Nicholas II. Good day to you too. Please, allow us to respond by opening fire.
Yeah, that's what happened. Is the protesters marched on the Winter Palace, but the Tsar wasn't there, and particularly in the crowd as well, you had women, children, and there was banners and stuff like that. And this wasn't necessarily an anti-Tsar protest. You know, in the crowd they had pro-Tsarist movements, and again, a thing to remember is Russian Orthodoxy as well. Part of the tenets was kind of like the Tsar. No, you should follow the Tsar, you should support the Tsar. And a lot of the people in the crowd actually were unhappy with the situation and what there was, but they wasn't necessarily hating the Tsar. I mean, some certainly were, but there was banners in there that were pro Tsar, and a lot of the people, including like the peasantry who had come in for this, believed that the Tsar would listen to them. If only they had to explain their situation to the Tsar, that he, as the nice, helpful ruler of Russia, will help them. And then when they arrived, the Winter Palace Guard, I think it was the Simversky Guards, apologies if I pronounced that wrong, opened fire on the crowd. And I can't remember the death toll, I don't know the death toll, but what I do know is it sparked outrage across the country, and that's the outcry, as I suspect, is what we're going to have a look at now.
What began as a peaceful protest ended in tragedy. Imperial soldiers opened fire on the crowd. Around 200 civilians died, 800 more were wounded. All they wanted was the opportunity to ask Nicholas to improve their lives. Instead, they were met with bullets. Nicholas didn't personally order the troops to fire, but as an autocrat, he got the blame. The event became known as Bloody Sunday.
Yeah. That's the thing, is Nicholas, he didn't actually explicitly order the troops to fire, but it's unclear what led to the troops to decide. A lot of evidence posts to the officer in charge of the Winter Guards simply didn't know how to handle the crowd, and the only way that they thought to handle them was to open fire on them. However, again, firing on innocent, peaceful crowds never goes well in history, generally speaking. And again, him as the autocrat, when one man holds all power, that means that when things go wrong, there is only one man responsible. And so, what turned from a peaceful, not necessarily anti-Tsar, but protest, but wanting to change, quickly deteriorated across the country against him.
And Nicholas's reputation plummeted. Strikes erupted across the empire. Workers' demands increased. Liberals demanded political power. Peasants demanded land. The country was out of control, and the 1905 revolution had begun. Listen, Nicholas, peasants seizing my land and murdering my family I can tolerate, but illegally chopping my wood? That's obscene! And the worse I treat my workers, the more they strike. I don't get it. Everyone relax. As long as the military is still on my side, there's nothing to worry about. Sir, the sailors are starting to mutiny. Well, my life just...
Yeah. You had the sailors of the Potemkin. I can't remember how to pronounce the name, but I think it was the sailors of Potemkin or something like that, Potemkin or Potemkin or something. They mutinied, and although it was only a minor mutiny, and as this we're going to show, it was crushed. It sent a strong message, because as long as the Tsar had the support of the military, he was essentially still untouchable. But if he began to lose the military, then things can change very rapidly. As we'll see in 1917 when that actually happens.
Sucks. With Russia still losing to the Japanese, unrest was growing in the military, and some sailors had even taken to killing officers. Having the people against you was bad enough, but if the military joined in, it would be game over. To make matters worse, in October, workers and Marxists, including one Leon Trotsky, began setting up local elected councils called Soviets that coordinated strikes and supplied the workers. Sergei could see the writing on the wall. Things were going south fast, and he needed a big idea to save the Tsar. And luckily, he had just that. You see, all these angry people from different parts of society weren't really working together, meaning there was a weakness to exploit.
Divide and conquer.
Sergei wrote a manifesto that would give the liberals an elected assembly called the Duma. It took some convincing, but eventually, Nicholas agreed to share power and have his laws approved by an elected assembly. Hey liberals, here's your stupid manifesto. Happy now? We certainly are. But what about these guys? Aren't you going to give them what they want? Oh, goodness no. I was just gonna kill them. With the liberals satisfied, and after ending the war with Japan, the Tsar brought thousands of troops home, who then dismantled the Soviets, arrested their leaders, and crushed the peasant uprisings in the countryside. And how about that pesky parliament Nicholas had agreed to share power with? Well, he then wrote a bunch of new laws, which basically said, hey, remember that manifesto I wrote and how you guys were going to approve my laws? Slight change of plan. Actually, I'm going to do whatever the hell I want, and you guys are going to shut up. What? The people won't stand for this. People? What people?
Yeah, it was, in a repressive way, it was a masterstroke. Because there were so many disillusioned groups, it was easy to divide and conquer them independently. So with the liberals particularly here as well, those who wanted democratic reform, he gave them the Duma, and then essentially nullified the Duma, the Duma's capability to actually do anything. You know, it was a government, but kind of government in name, but not actually in actuality. And those on the poorer rungs of society then, again, send in the military when all else fails, you can subdue them by force, and that's what happened. Repression and fear. Again, potentially also might have spiked from Nicholas witnessing Alexander II's death. The Hand of Assassins was those who aren't with me are potential dissidents. Potential dissidents might be assassins, and he didn't want that to happen either. But yeah.
You know, this is why people don't like you. And just like that, Nicholas had survived the 1905 revolution.
Yep.
But wait, a revolution? In Russia? Where was Lenin? Well, Lenin and his communist pals were still in exile. He tried desperately to radicalize the uprising, but all he could do was watch. As the movements failed to organize, the liberals sold out the poor, and the Tsar outplayed the people. Furious, he believed Russia had missed a great chance for a real revolution. From now on, he felt the only way left was an armed revolution by the workers. Watching the events of 1905 unfold, Lenin learned a lot. The Tsar, however, would prove to have learned nothing. After the 1905 revolution had failed, the Tsar's new top man was Pyotr Stollpin.
Yeah, so this was the guy that I spoke about earlier, and I genuinely do think he's one of the most influential people in the 20th century, and I think his death certainly is one of the most influential moments of the 20th century. I know I'm jumping ahead here because he hasn't actually explained it, but in a sense he was almost, in terms of what he done, he was magnificent in the sense that he was extremely effective as a statesman. He became prime minister or president in 1905, whatever the term is, and he was a master of the carrot and the stick. So he used the Okhrana with extreme and terrifying precision, rounding up thousands of dissidents, political enemies, anybody who could potentially be sowing seeds of revolution or dissidents were arrested, murdered, many without trial, and so much so many people were actually hanged. It actually became a running joke to kind of nickname their hangman's noose as the Stollpin necktie, because that's how many people were killed. And so he was a master of using the stick, but at the same time he was also a master of using the carrot, because although he rounded up dissidents and he carried out these things to those who sought to oppose the Tsar, to oppose the way things actually were, he also pushed through several positive reforms. So it was stuff like allowing peasants to buy land from people. He allowed peasants to buy land, which was one thing they'd wanted for a long time, land reform. The actual ability for peasants to gain access to larger plots of land so they can grow more food. Expanding worker rights and unemployment. So if somebody was made unemployment, there was at least some sort of safety net almost that they could have. Not as we would have it today, but almost a bit like the old poor law, if people know anything about England, so that if people lose their jobs, there was some sort of charity or some sort of financial help or recompense that could help those people in hard times. And the particular thing as well was he warned he warned the Tsar strongly against getting involved in European wars. He urged the Tsar strongly to de-escalate any tensions as much as he could, because he rightly said that Russia was in no way capable of fighting a war, particularly against the European power. And so in his tenancy, he was assassinated in 1911, I think. Yeah, I think he was assassinated in 1911. I need to check that, and if I'm wrong, I'll correct it in the description, like I'll do with other errors if I have made them. But I believe he was assassinated in 1911 at an opera house. Funnily enough, he was enjoying the opera, and an opera informer who was also a dissident himself shot him and killed him, and there was almost an outcry of sadness, really, because although people hated him for the secret police, a lot of people loved him because of the reforms that he had made. And the biggest thing, though, was with his death, it meant that the Romanovs' capability to survive the tide that was coming was non-existent. He was a measured man who calculated things very much so. And when he died, and particularly again when Rasputin came into it, which we haven't even mentioned yet, Nicholas II was in no way equipped to deal with the problems. Stollpin really, from 1905 to when he was assassinated, was the person behind the chair, kind of working in the shadows to keep the Russian Empire together, to keep it running. And with all things considered as well, the Russian society was actually doing very well under Stollpin. The economy was increasing and stuff like that. But when he was assassinated, it was a hammer blow for the Romanovs. It was a hammer blow for the Russian economy at the time and stuff like that. And it would go on to be when you consider what happened when they got involved with the war. But the one big plus and win it was for Lenin and other potential revolutionaries, because as soon as he was out of the picture, they viewed, and rightly so, that Nicholas II was by no means equipped to deal with dissidents, to deal with revolutionaries. He was naive and he didn't know how to make correct, calculated decisions like Stollpin was. And now with Stollpin out of the picture, that meant that the revolution was there for the taking. And so I think he's one of the most influential men of the 20th century. And particularly if he hadn't been assassinated, then the course of history, the course of the 20th century history particularly as well, could have been vastly different. But that's getting way into alternate history, and I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah.
And he had big ideas to prevent any more chaos. Step 1, reform agriculture. This'll make the peasants love you. And step 2, we'll kill anyone who doesn't. To discourage any more revolutionary ideas,
yeah, the carrot and the stick,
began to crack down even harder on the Tsar's opponents, and thousands were sentenced to death. The noose even earned itself a new nickname, Stollpin's necktie.
Yeah.
I don't get it. Oh, I see, because it goes around my neck. That's so funny. But despite the oppression, many positive reforms were also being made, and the Russian economy even began to improve. This was a problem for Lenin. If the people weren't suffering, then they wouldn't support a revolution. Still in exile and lacking funds, the Bolsheviks simply weren't in a position to do anything. Luckily, it was around this time that Lenin met an incredibly handsome Georgian with your second favorite historical mustache,
Stalin.
Joseph Stalin. Lenin and Stalin met at a communist convention in Finland, and Lenin liked Stalin because he was a real go-getter and was great at fundraising for the Bolsheviks. And by fundraising, I mean kidnapping, robbing, extorting, bribing, ransoming, assassinating, prison breaking, stealing, bank raiding, executioning, and stealing again. Hey Stalin, the Mensheviks aren't so hot in all this stealing, but we still need money. So the next time you do a big heist, just do it quietly. Okay, quietly. Got it. If this isn't quiet, I don't know what is. Stalin's wacky antics eventually got him exiled to Siberia, but he had established himself as a big balls Bolshevik. However, no amount of Bolshevik bulls could stop what was happening. The Russian economy was making a recovery. For the Tsar, things were looking up. This is great. All Nicholas has to do is sit back and not mess anything up. Hey everyone, big news. I'd like to introduce you to my new best friend. He's a crazy, drunken, beardy, horny, scandal-ridden magic wizard man, and he smells like a goat. We're screwed. Rasputin.
Yeah. So again, popular. They even made a song after him. Yeah. Rasputin as well particularly wasn't a fan of Stollpin either. Because Stollpin didn't like him, he didn't trust him. And Rasputin would cause a host of issues in himself. I mean, we'll get to him, I suppose. But one thing, he was rumoured to have was an affair with the Tsarina, Alexandra, although a lot of evidence suggests that that was false, that didn't happen, that was just propaganda against the Tsars and Rasputin. However, what he was deemed to have done was to be able to heal their haemophiliac son, whose name eludes me at the minute now. But yeah, he was rumoured to help them, and that made the kind of Tsar and the Tsarina indentured to him in a way. They adored him. However, he had both their ears, very much so, particularly the Tsarina, and that meant that you sometimes had very competent government ministers and officials who were dismissed because Rasputin didn't like them, and instead they replaced him with his friends who were incompetent or didn't know how to do their job and was more interested, again, in debauchery or partying and stuff like that, rather than actually running a country. But again, getting ahead of myself, let Oversimplified actually do the work, shall we?
A dirt poor peasant from dirt poor nowhere. But unlike all the other dirt poor peasants, Rasputin had holy healing powers. And when this holy mystic wandered into St. Petersburg, people began to notice. He quickly became famous, and word of this mystery man and his healing hands made its way to the royal palace. The appearance of a holy homeless healer was of great interest to the Tsar and his wife. As far as royals go, they weren't that inbred, but they were just inbred enough for their son Alexei to get hemophilia, or in layman's terms, Mamma mia, that's a lot of blood. Knowing Rasputin could heal people, in 1906, Alexandra asked for Rasputin to come and see if he could cure their son. And crazy as it sounds, Rasputin did heal Alexei, possibly by taking him off his doctor-prescribed aspirin. Having seemingly done the impossible, Rasputin became very, very close to the royal family. But having a crazy homeless wizard man hanging around wasn't a good look for the Tsar, because Rasputin was freaky. Not only was he a big fan of alcohol, but he'd also throw these crazy parties with Russian nobility, where he'd and all night long, and then he'd his whole head, if not a guy's, and nobody knew how the goat got on the roof. Initially, the press were banned from talking about Rasputin, but eventually, the ban was lifted, and the tabloids went to town. The whole thing was a huge scandal, and everyone was freaked out that this guy was influencing the Tsar and his wife.
Yeah, there was even a poster at the time during Russia, where there was a cartoon of Rasputin looking relatively evil, and on his hands he had puppet controls, like string puppets, and both the puppets with the Tsar and the Tsarina. So Rasputin, for an awful lot of people, was extremely unpopular, and he should be nowhere near the Tsar and the Tsarina. And from the common kind of media perspective, was that Rasputin had the Tsar and the Tsarina as puppets on a string. And again, that only went more to discredit the Tsar and the Tsarina, Nicholas II's authority, and it obviously discredited them even more when the rumours come out about the Rasputin and the Tsarina having an affair, which again, must state that a lot of evidence suggests that that wasn't true, that was entirely made up. But the point is, once that's in public knowledge, it's only going to undermine the Tsar's authority even more than it already was.
Nicholas could have spent this period of relative peace improving his image. Instead, he spent it doing this. But as weird as the whole Rasputin thing was, so long as the economy continued to improve and the people's lives kept getting better, maybe Nick would be okay. Maybe there would be no more revolutions. Maybe this video could even end right here. Or maybe things were about to get worse. A lot worse. You see, the year is 1914, and that means it's time for World War I.
So that's the end of part one. That was really good. That was really entertaining. I didn't. There was a lot of it that I didn't actually know about, like the coronation, the fact that people were kind of stampeded at Nicholas's coronation. That's a new one. And again, I was expecting to cover actually the March and February Revolution in this one, but we haven't reached there yet. So second part's definitely going to be the part that I know a bit more about. As I said, I hope I've been able to fill in some of the gaps or apply some extra information that's hopefully helped you guys learn something, and hopefully it's been entertaining and enjoyable. And so part two, I'll get on to part two, and from that one I know a little bit more about that, and so hopefully I'll be able to fill in the gaps and go into a little bit more detail about both the revolutions, because they're quite interesting, let's say that, and they develop very, very quickly. So without further ado, please go over and support the OverSimplified guys. They do a cracking job, and if you like this, then of course I appreciate likes and comments, and any feedback is welcome. Other than that, have a fun, enjoyable and safe day. Thank you. Bye.